my name is Kevin White. I'm the Director of Operations and Business Development for TRINUS Technologies, and I'd like to spend some time today just reviewing best practices when it comes to IT security for working from home. I know that this is top of mind for a lot of people, especially with COVID-19 on the go, but these are just good things to keep in mind if you have you yourself or any staff are working from home. It can be a little bit less secure. And that leads me to my first point. It's important to realize that when you're working from home in a traditional IT network, it's inherently less secure than when you're in the office. There are less security countermeasures deployed when you're at home compared to being in the office, so there's always going to be some level of risk. It's almost always worth the risk if things are set up properly, but it's just something to keep in mind. It's just inherently less secure in the majority of cases. The first thing to keep in mind is to always use two-factor authentication. So whether you're connecting to your corporate network remotely over a virtual private network, which is commonly referred to as VPN, or you're accessing a remote desktop server or your own workstation through remote desktop, having two-factor authentication is crucial. Typically what it results to is a push notification running to something like a smartphone. It could be a text message or an email. The push notification is typically the best way to do it, but it just prevents, it really puts a hard stop on hackers or somebody with malicious intent trying to compromise your network remotely. It's important to keep in mind that if your users are using VPN, that they do not VPN from a personal computing device, that they VPN from a corporate secured device that is maintained by your IT provider or by your internal IT department that has your corporate antivirus installed on it, and that they have some level of visibility, your IT has some level of visibility on that device. What can happen is as soon as you create a virtual private network connection or VPN connection between that device and your corporate network, if that personal device is infected with some sort of malware or has been compromised in some way, you've essentially just compromised the rest of your network. So obviously there's a significant security concern there. It's also important to keep in mind that if you're using remote desktop, that it's not good practice to be remotely connecting to your workstation that's in the office. Even if you're using a corporate-owned device, say a laptop at home, to remote desktop connect into your desktop computer that's in the office, there's a couple reasons why that's not ideal. The first is that it's extremely difficult to manage for an IT provider or for an IT department. If you think about it, it's multiplied by the amount of people that you have within the organization, as opposed to having a centralized remote desktop server where everybody is connecting to the same server or to the same virtual desktop environment, if you have such a thing. And once you've got the more remote connections that you have, the more security holes get poked in your network every time. So as opposed to having a single point of internet access through a single remote desktop server or virtual desktop infrastructure configuration, you now have something that's maybe multiple times that, depending on the amount of users that you have accessing their computers in that way. It's also really important to ensure that employees are not storing any corporate data on personal computers. I saw a statistic the other day that when polled, over 40% of employees throughout a variety of industries have admitted to slacking on cybersecurity practices and best practices that they've been taught and have agreed with when they're compared to working in the office when they're working at home. So obviously that's a significant concern. A lot of people are, okay, well, I'm checking my email on personal devices or on a personal laptop. I'm downloading these corporate files on personal devices. And if you have any sort of sensitive information or employees are working with sensitive information, as soon as it reaches a personal device, it's gone. You can't, there's no way for you to track what happens to it after that. It could be easily compromised, shared, be it advertently or inadvertently. So that's something that's important to educate your users on. You should also ask them to limit what they're using corporate devices for when they are at home. They shouldn't be using it for home work, browsing Amazon or Facebook or anything like that. The same standards or recommendations that you have when they're in the office should apply to when they're at home. And obviously when they're at home, it can be much more tempting to be doing those things because not only is somebody not looking over my shoulder or you're not going to get caught in doing it, but also the lines between when you're doing work and when you're doing personal time at home is obviously they become blurred much quicker. You want to encourage employees to remain vigilant when they're working from home. You are typically not behind, like when you're in the office, you have a corporate firewall that protects and initially scans all traffic coming into your network. When you're at home, obviously, in most cases, you don't have that. Now, if you're connecting over a VPN connection or a virtual private network, a lot of cases, internet traffic for that user is actually routed through the corporate firewall in the main office, which is good. But when somebody's using a corporate device and they're not connected over a VPN and they're at home, they have inherently less security on their device. They have antivirus typically installed, which is good, but they don't have the extra level of filtering. So it's important to make sure that, okay, don't click on anything you don't understand, don't be open up spam, and definitely be vigilant and question things that don't look normal to you. Finally, a couple things that I'll mention is that make sure that employees aren't trying to use what we like to call in the industry shadow IT and get around the way that your network is set up. This is typically done when employees try and enable, or they download a personal version of Dropbox or Google Drive or OneDrive or iCloud or something like that, and they upload corporate files into that personal Dropbox account or Google Drive account so that they can share it with colleagues, because obviously it's more difficult, or it's typically more difficult to share and collaborate on information when working from home, and Dropbox and Google Drive and OneDrive and SharePoint and things like that can be good tools to aid with that. But unless that solution is managed by your organization in something like SharePoint or a corporate version of Google Drive, your IT department has no way to regulate the use of those tools. And so, again, they're not only are they on somebody's computer at that point, but they've also been uploaded to the cloud. What level of security are on those accounts? Are those accounts secured with two-factor authentication? Your corporate IT has no say in what data protection is like in that circumstance. And so data can easily be shared. As soon as it's really uploaded to the cloud, it's going to be there almost forever. So you really have lost control over your data, which can be a huge compliance concern, especially for government. So that's something to keep in mind. It's important to encourage your users to remain vigilant when it comes to any sort of social engineering scams. Typically, this is when somebody is trying to impersonate the CEO or the CAO or the CFO or the mayor or the Reeve in saying, hey, I need you to wire a bunch of money to this account, or I need you to do something to provide services or send this money to somebody's account, when it's actually, and it looks like it's coming from that individual's email, but it's actually coming from somebody else, and they're trying to scam you out of a significant amount of money. This has happened to quite a few local governments. It's happened to the city of Saskatoon, for example, for millions of dollars. And before, one of the big preventions against that is you were able to go to that person's office and ask them, hey, did you send me this email? Is this legitimate? And typically they would say, no, I didn't send you that email. Please don't do that, and delete the email. But now, not being in the same office as someone, it seems simple, but that's more difficult to do. You have to either message them on an instant messenger, you have to give them a call. Don't respond to that email, obviously, because if somebody's sending you email, any response that you send is going to go back to that individual. So just confirm with them in another way to make sure that you're not, your employees aren't accidentally sending money or other goods or information to people who shouldn't be receiving it. And finally, create a work-from-home policy that specifically talks about the things I just mentioned and specifically talks about IT. Employees should be signing off and complying and agreeing with a policy that says, I will not be doing some of these things. I will be being vigilant. I will not be using my computer for personal use. I will not be using my personal Dropbox to store and share and synchronize corporate data. You want to make sure that they sign off on that because if something does go wrong and they were doing that, then at least from a liability standpoint, you're in much better shape if you have a record of telling them not to do that. So I hope this was helpful for you. I hope that the other sessions have also been helpful, the other tips have also been helpful, and I hope that you have a great day. Thank you.